Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for coming today. A bit of a small crowd. I think this is going to be a good opportunity to just kind of ask some questions and stuff. Even Jerell from 90s is going to be talking a little bit about the product life cycle. And yeah, let's one more kick. Okay, guys. Since it's such a small crowd, if I can get a quick introduction of who you guys are and what you do, starting over here with me.
Tim, I am just a student at the American. I'm Nixon, a student as well.
So,
My name is Miren. I came from Spain 4 months ago, and I work in marketing.
okay. And
I'm Fred, and I'm a student here as well.
awesome.
I'm Kendra and I work here.
I'm Matthias and I work here too. Awesome. Cool. All right, so this is actually kind of nice. It's a small group. So my background is in technology. My name is Jerell Lee. I am the manager of product management for finance and HR technology at Nike. We do analytics essentially, so we're just warehousing data in the cloud and sharing it to business units that need to use it for HR and finance purposes. To kick this off, I kind of wanted to show something. I'm a huge golf head. I love golf, and I saw something really funny the other day, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. So this is Tiger Woods, and this is one of the most iconic moments in golf. So, takes a shot. It's pretty amazing, right? Huge successes. But one thing that I noticed in the replay, and I went through a lot of trouble to rip this video and slow it down a bit, is this here. Watch what happens. Look at that. No one notices that, right? So I was kind of talking to a friend and just laughing about this, and he told me something. I'm sure you guys have already heard this, but like I grew up in Korea, so a lot of this stuff I missed out on. But you don't look at the hand when you're giving a high five. Have you guys heard that before? Yeah. So you're supposed to look at the elbow. So if you guys have a minute to just stand up and find someone to partner with, you look at their elbow and try to give them a high five.
Nice.
Yeah. So it works, right? Yeah, it's solid. It explains why I usually miss my high fives. I look like Tiger Woods. So quick background about me in technology. I have a background kind of that spans all over the place. I worked at the Pentagon to start out. That was my first job. I worked there for about 2 years, and the government was a little too slow for me. So I decided to transition out of there and kind of jump around these 2 startups. So there's One Mind Health, so I was in the healthcare industry for a while. And then I was in custom software development, so doing virtual reality games. I was doing, iOS development, mobile apps, and then also in-store experiences for companies like Verizon and Comcast. And then I went to big data, and that's where I kind of got obsessed with data. It was at Asurion. They do a lot of the large data processing for companies like Sears, for Macy's, Target, and then I ended up working for Uncle Phil, so that's why I'm here for today. A few of the things that I've worked on during my time, I used to be a developer before I transitioned over to the product world, but I've worked on a lot of different platforms, a lot of different technologies. These are just a few of the things that are kind of important to me right now in my career, especially Python, just because I'm in the data space. So to start out, I wanted to tell you guys a quick story about something I noticed the other day. I was walking home with this giant pile of groceries, and like at any moment everything could have fallen. And I'm getting into the elevator, and there are 2 guys in there. One's this really old guy. He's really friendly in our apartment building, and he greets me. He's super kind. And then there's another guy just kind of on his phone. He's like a younger guy in his 20s, and he's just on his phone. He's standing in the middle of the door. And eventually, he's hearing me struggle. He doesn't even look up to greet me. He kind of just steps inside, and I squeeze past him and almost drop all of my stuff. And then in that process, I kind of look at him for a second. I was like, it's not a big deal. He's probably having a tough day. I'm holding my stuff, and we're going up in the elevator. It feels like, you know, when you're in an elevator, it feels like 10 years. But we're going up, and I'm just having some cordial conversation with the guy next to me. And in the process of that, my bananas fall off of the top of my pile, and it kind of falls into the corner where only the guy on the phone can reach it. And the whole time, he just didn't move. He just sat there and just like didn't turn around, didn't like wasn't concerned. And like finally, I'm like trying to squeeze by him with my pile of stuff, and he takes this tiny little step to the right so that I could just barely reach past him and grab it. And he gets out the elevator, and the older guy was like, "Man, some people are just in their own world." In my head, I was just like, what type of software has this guy so connected? Because whatever they built is like working, you know? So like, while some people might think that, you know, from a social perspective that people are becoming disconnected, I think that we're just becoming more connected in a different way. So, are you guys familiar with the development lifecycle?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so I'll skip this one. It's pretty simple, but I'll kind of jump over to this chart because this one is pretty important to me. I consider myself a creator in the product space, so one of the things that's important to me is like understanding, because a lot of times I'm not making my own ideas, right? I'm working with other people to make their ideas become a reality. So this is the process that I go through, but it's more than just little bullets on a line, right? So like understanding the problem is super important. So a lot of times when you think of something or think of an issue, you immediately solution, but it's important to spend some extra time actually understanding the true problem, because there could be hidden problems within that problem, and you might end up solving for the wrong problem. So spending like really good time like analyzing and researching those early stages of a project is super, super important, and that's really where you find your nuggets of inspiration. And then you transition into the ideation phase where you have a few potential solutions, and then you start to build from there. And to give some context, the reason why I'm going over this in particular is like, how many of you guys have professional experience of like building a product from end to end, like in the real world? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's going to be the most important thing, right? Being connected is super important, because when you transition, what's going to happen is you're going to be thrown into the fray, right? You're going to join a team, a bunch of different people, some that you get along with, some that you don't, and you're going to have to go through this process every step of the way while working with those people in order to deliver something that's valuable, right? And throughout that process, there's interpersonal issues, there's software issues, like all business issues from the top down, from the bottom up. So these things are super important to the process, and remembering that this is all tied to human interaction is super important. So you ideate, and then you finally get to the point where you're validating, right? So you're trying to understand, go out there, do some research with the end user. Is this problem that we're trying to solve, like maybe napkin drawings that you can do to try to get your point across on, like, what is this problem we're trying to solve? Do you think that visually, if it's an interactive tool that people are going to leverage, is this something that they would want to interact with from a user experience perspective? And then you test that idea, and then once you test it and you have validated all of that, then you start to get into the place where you're starting to build hard, concrete requirements, right? So once you have those requirements, you either determine, this isn't something we want to spend our money on, there's something else out there that's better, it'll take too long for us to build. You can either go back through the pivot and iteration phase, and you can exit through there at any time. But in the initial stages, it's really important to not just do, because like that's what happens all the time. We're seeing it all the time at Nike as well, like large corporations, the business units, and you guys will experience this eventually. Is like you have people with a lot of power and influence, and they'll just tell you to build something, right? And then you build it, you release it, and then it ends up not like being valuable, and that's. It never comes down to the developer as their responsibility of saying, hey, you guys delivered something that's not viable, that people don't care about, but it's part of your soul, right? Like if you're a developer, if you're working in technology, it's part of who you are. You're wanting to build things that are good, right? Like that are awesome. So once you get past that and you start to get into the other circle over here, it goes counterclockwise this time. So you want to get through the process of taking those requirements. You develop, you iterate on that, and then you test, and then you shift into deployment. So all of that is kind of squished together just because, are you guys familiar with the Agile methodology? Have you guys been working on that as well? Do you guys work in increments during the courses, or do they just train you guys, or kind of teach you about how to?
They just teach us.
Okay.
It's our own base.
Okay, it's awesome. It's super cool. I'm a huge proponent for the agile methodology, just because it's really important to team efficiency, and what it does is it gives the developers the power to make the decisions. And you guys will realize that a lot when you get into the real world. Is like when you're a developer, a lot of people think that you're sitting at your desk and taking orders and kind of building awesome shit all the time. Excuse me, I don't know if I can cuss, but so, but the actual way that developers work today is they're super powerful. You have a lot of influence within the companies because business people don't know what they're doing, right? They have no idea how to leverage technology. They don't know what's new. They don't know what's old. So they're really looking to you guys to actually show them, right? So throughout this process and the iterative process of Agile is that you're working closely with the team, you're able to give feedback to your team members to tell them, hey, you know, like we missed something on QA or something, like our testing wasn't good last sprint and we totally missed this huge bug and now we have to rework everything and all of our priorities are shifting and our timeline's going to be longer. Let's try and get better about that. So develop, test, deploy, and then you measure, which is huge too. So measuring is important because you don't want to just put stuff out there in the wild. You want to understand how it's faring. You really want to understand the metrics behind, you know, how many users are using this, if it's a user-based application, or you know, how many times are people looking at this dashboard, if it's data, because you want to understand if, because this is all an empirical, like this is the empirical method, right? It's like science. Like you have a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis, and you want to have an outcome, right? So this is your outcome. So you're measuring, is what we thought in these early stages here that we identified as a potential solution to a problem, were we successful in solving that problem? And that's the best time to do it. And it's not easy, especially as a product person, because that's usually when you realize, like, holy shit, no one wants to use our app, or no one wants, like, you know, our monthly recurring users were projected to be 2,000 people every month, but we have 400 users, or maybe in one of the cases in our previous companies, it's like 10 users, right? And how do we get that to where we want it to be? So that being said, one of the things that I live by is that connected people make connected products. So when you guys make the transition, you're working on end-to-end development and you're going through the development life cycle in the real world, and you guys are getting experience now, and you will be getting more experience. But one of the things to remember is that nothing can be done without human connection. Like when you're working on a product and you're trying to collaborate and move fast, there are companies who are, of course, paying you, and that has nothing to do with it, but it's the fact that there's always a cost associated with how you spend your time. And if you're working on a team where people aren't communicating, that quickly becomes a huge time suck in, and it makes the whole process of development extremely unenjoyable. So one of the things to remember is that regardless of it being technology, you're extremely connected with people. You're communicating with them all the time. You're not just doing development, you're really managing a whole host of different things, whether it's relationships with people, expectations from your stakeholders. And if companies are really dedicated to the development lifecycle, what you'll see a lot of times is you're interacting directly with those end users on a weekly basis. So you're able to talk to them and say, hey, I implemented this, I legitimately coded this feature for you. What do you think? And it's not always going to be positive, but being able to separate that and like separate your emotions from what you felt and understand what their genuine feedback is and continue to iterate on that to ultimately be better is super important. Alright, so I actually wanted to kind of leave the rest of the time and just like chat with you guys. I felt like it was going to be a smaller group of people, so I wanted to kind of based on like the group size here and you know where you guys are, share a little bit about my experiences in technology, and then we can go from there and kind of open it up for questions and have it interactive. It's typically how I like to work. So if you guys have questions at any point, let me know. But I wanted to talk about a few experiences in particular. So last quarter, so at the end of last year, one of the really important, like something that kind of opened my eyes. I feel like I've gotten sucked into the, like I went from a startup to corporate culture at Nike, and it's actually not as corporate as it could be. it's pretty open and free and accepting. But I realized or didn't realize that I was kind of getting sucked into this hierarchical like form of like biased like decision making that was driven by the business. And one of my team members, I'll never forget this. One of my team members, we were in a room ideating in that initial stages of a project, and there's this group called they're called iPay. So what they do is they have warehouses in Nike, and our warehouses ship out like hundreds of thousands of like units every single day. So we went to go visit them because they're like, hey, we're trying to figure out how to build software to make this place more efficient. And as you could imagine, walking into a ginormous like campus with multiple warehouses, you're just looking around and what the hell can I do with technology to make this more efficient, right? And then one of my teammates was like sitting there, like talking to this lady at a scanner the whole time. So my teammate's just sitting there the whole day, and then at the end of the day, he comes and he's like shaking his head, and he's like, "Dude, I can't believe they're doing that." And I was like, "What?" He was like, "Dude, every time a shipment goes out, they are writing on a piece of paper what's going in that load, and then they manually have the truck driver sign it, and then they store it in a box." So I was like, "Well, how many sheets of paper do they do per day?" He was like 8,000, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I was like, "Can you show me? Can you show me this?" And they literally had one half of the warehouse with cabinets and cabinets and cabinets of like hard paper like stored, and you see like other people kind of going and opening them and looking around and like going and looking around, and like I went over to one of the ladies and I was like, "Hey, how long does this take you?" And she calls over her coworker, and this guy walks over and he was like, "Oh, actually, it takes us about 2 weeks to find one piece of paper on average." And I was like, "How many people do you have doing this on a daily basis?" So it turns out Nike was spending about $8 million every single week trying to solve this problem, and we were like, "All right, we're gonna solve this issue." So what we did was we ended up building an application. It wasn't really application; it was just hodgepodge like things like leveraging AWS like recognition and processing, like image processing. But we built a process that was super simple. All they would have to do is go to the scanner. We partnered with Ricoh, the scanning company, to create a custom button on there. So it would scan the file to an S3 folder in the Nike space. So it would scan it to a folder, and then what we would do is we would scan that page using image processing, and then we would take that barcode and store it in our database. So we would warehouse that, and then we would warehouse it with all of the other information that we could scrape from the image as well. So we built this database, and instead of walking over, putting it in there, we would actually just have them scan it. So they would stick it in this huge pile on the scanner, and it could work through like hundreds of them in minutes. So just scan all of them through there. So we developed this process that instead of putting it in the box, you'd be able to start scanning it. So now, not only do they have that data available, instead of having people look around, all they have to do is go to a Tableau dashboard and just query for it. Like type in the number or the shipment number, and that file along with the picture will come up. To date, I think that was about a year and a half ago, and to date they've saved about, I want to say, $46 million leveraging just this really ugly dashboard. I'm not gonna lie, it's really ugly. Really ugly dashboard that we built. Like it took us 4 weeks, right? And normally in larger corporations it takes months to build something like that. We didn't get approval for any of that work, but it was just an idea that we felt was right, and we chased the feedback that we were getting from the actual end user. So I kind of wanted to open it up to questions. I know you guys you guys are in the stages of learning, and so are some of you guys. But I'm curious if you guys have any questions at all about what you're experiencing now, what you're learning, how you might apply that once you're done learning, making a transition. Because that's something I did. I was a developer in the early stages of my career, and I started out as a BSA at the Pentagon, and I was spending all of my time writing SQL queries, and I was getting really bored of that. So then I started learning JavaScript, and then I started building custom software. And then that transition for me wasn't easy at all. So I'm wondering if you guys have any questions that you might want to ask. It could be anything unrelated to this, anything related to technology. Yes.
Um, so if you full stack, right? I have problems with that word because you know all of these languages, and then but most of the recruiters or once you want to get placed in a job, they're looking for somebody that's an expert in
Yeah.
one thing.
Yep.
And they normally, right, take somebody that's an expert in Python, maybe an expert in Java, maybe an expert in whatever language. So as a beginner, when you start it, you're learning everything, right? Because you want to become more valuable
Yeah.
for other companies. How do we choose? How do we, I don't know. That's so hard for me. Like that's my biggest problem. Like, I don't know to go Python route because of data analysis. Because I don't know what I like at this point.
Yeah. I hope you're recording because if I get this right, I feel like I deserve $1 million. This is a really hard question. It's super hard because it was the same thing for me, right? I didn't know if JavaScript was the right thing. Ruby on Rails was huge at the time when I was making my transition. But I think when you're a developer, you have superpowers, right? I think everyone has a superpower. And for me, the way that I decided was it was between Python and JavaScript, right? So I tried to solve a similar problem with both languages, and I was just way faster with JavaScript. I felt more comfortable in it. Python, I was kind of like having to go look up libraries and like kind of test things out, and it was a fun process. I would say you do want to consider your career prospects as in, what industry do you expect to be in, right? Like if you're in data, you might not want to do, JavaScript might not be the route for you. It might be in Python, right? So if you're obsessed with data, you like numbers, that should be able to help you limit things as far as like where you go. Not necessarily limit yourself, but you kind of hone in on where you should start, right? Full stack, you're absolutely right. But even full stack developers have their strength. That superpower that I was talking about. And I don't know, do you have anything that you're more comfortable with right now that makes more sense to you?
I really like Python because I learned Python first and then I'm learning C# now.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing that Python is like a compiled version of the bigger language.
Yeah.
So then I like the bigger language because whenever you initialize a variable and you put the type first, it's like it's more detailed.
Yeah.
So it gives you more information than Python. Like you could just declare something and finish.
Sure.
You cannot just do that.
Yeah.
Simply, the language. So I don't know. It depends on the purpose, but I did enjoy Python in general.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a tough one. But I will say that when you are coming into the industry or into an industry, and you come in as Python, you always have an opportunity to shift, right? For me personally, on all of my Agile teams, I believe in T-shaped resources. So I had a guy on my team who was very specifically focused on ETL, so data processing. He was a specialist in that, and he was always like looking at everyone else's dashboard. He was the one who actually built the dashboard I was talking about. But he would always look at dashboards and say, "Man, this thing sucks. Like, why are we doing this?" And then one day I was just joking with him. I was like, "Why don't you build something better?" And the next day he came in and had a prototype, and I was like, "This looks way better." So like I was like, "Is this something you actually want to do?" And people will give you those opportunities, especially early on in your career. They understand that you're flexible. Because when you have 15 or 20 years of experience as a data modeler or with Python, you start to get segmented into a specific industry. But when you're early on and you're still learning, you have a long time to kind of jump around from like place to place. And I would like to say that full stack developers are kind of grown, right? Like they don't just pop out of nowhere. Because you have to get that experience leveraging different languages in different places. So regardless of what you start with, you'll always have an opportunity to try a new language or something else elsewhere to start adding to the dimension of becoming a true full stack developer.
But you would recommend specializing on something for like a prolonged period of time?
I wouldn't say a prolonged period of time, but like if there's something that you're more comfortable with and proficient in that you can really show people, like, 'cause it all comes down to if someone sat you down in front of them and they're like, show me what you have, like show me what you got, right? And say you're more proficient in JavaScript as opposed to Python, you probably wouldn't want to take a test in front of them doing whatever it is, right? Like, but I will say that it's kind of like a double-edged sword because sometimes you want to be able to stretch your skills, right? Because if you want to learn Python and you might be less proficient in it, you might be willing to take that risk and try to stretch your skills to get into a role that requires an expert in Python, right? Because once you're there, you have that longevity of trying to learn and ramp up. It's kind of like it's an interesting game to play, but I will say that having something that you were genuinely proficient in is helpful because it'll help you speak the language of like whenever they're interviewing you, especially from a developer's perspective. They're going to ask you questions specifically related to anything that you put on there for development, right? Whether it's actually giving you, like asking you to write a script or whatever it is, or to like ask, like presenting you with a piece of code and saying, what does this do? So whenever you're kind of going about it that way, I would say it's really about what you're chasing. So if you're looking to stretch those skills in a certain area that you want to learn more, I would say go for it, but then also have something that's your backup that people would be like, okay, he's got a base, or so that would be my answer to that.
What's like the majority of the types of projects that you work on with your teams? Like, is it filling those needs where you go into the warehouse and find a problem and then fill that need, or do they oftentimes just give you a project as an advantage?
So I'm pretty hard-headed. So if people give me a project, I turn it into that anyway. I'm like, show me the end user is usually what I say. Is like, who's using this or who will use this, and I'll kind of force the conversation of like who really needs this, and then I'll try to influence what they're trying to tell us to build. Because that happens way too often, where someone thinks they know the answer for someone else, but they never ask that other person. So right now it's mostly, so it used to be project-based work at Nike specifically. Before it was all like, go out there and find a problem and solve it, especially at the startups. But at Nike in particular, in the data space, what happens is, data domains are defined. You have finance, you have HR, you have buy, sell, all these domains that are defined across all industries. So it's a pretty set space. What's intricate and interesting is how people want to leverage that to make business decisions. So most of what we get is project-based because business units are coming to say, hey, we want to understand how many contractors we have as opposed to FTEs or full-time employees, right? And then you'll have to go out there and understand, okay, based on all of the data landscape at Nike, what bubbles do we need to pull together to create one big bubble in order to get visibility into that? And then how do we do that so that we never have to stitch these bubbles back together again, right? Build a foundation. So yeah, it's a mix, but I typically, so we work in six sprint iterations. So like I mentioned, at Nike we work in by quarters, so 3-month iterations, 2-week iterations in between there, so 6 sprints. And I always reserve the last sprint for all of my squads, so I manage 4 squads right now. I always reserve that last sprint for what I call an innovation sprint. So I literally tell the team, work on whatever you want, and then we're going to show each other what we built in that 2 weeks. It doesn't have to be related to a project. It can be. It can be like if the team thought there was a better way to build it and the business wanted it one way. If they wanted to build it better and show the business and show us, I give them that opportunity. So I kind of try to mix it up as much as possible because, like I said, development is an extremely exciting place to be, but product and the structure that is around development largely influences the experience of being a developer.
So it's one of those whole, like the product life cycle chart that you showed us, that is one sprint from beginning to end.
Yeah, so the yellow would be one sprint, the whole thing. Yeah. So it's the one. But yeah, this is one sprint. This is usually, hopefully, you'll get to a point, and a few of these things, requirements change. So this is always happening, requirements gathering. But yeah, so this entire circle is typically one sprint. Yeah.
That's fast.
Yeah, it's really fast. And when you're at a larger company, it doesn't happen this fast. Typically, what you'll end up doing is you'll end up either cutting this and holding it until the end before implementation. So these two will wait, and it'll be developed, measured by kind of taking a look at how, like, you're not measuring against like the actual progress towards like the end user's experience, but you're more measuring how are we tracking towards having this entire solution built. And then when you're closer to the end of having that solution in place where you can implement it, then you'll start doing this as part of the cycle. Going around.
What is your background in education? What did you study to get to the job that you have now?
Perfect, actually. It's actually interesting. I did not study technology or computer science or anything like that. I did computer science for 1 year when I got to college. But I signed up really late for classes, and the class that I got stuck with was a 7 to 9:30 p.m. course. And it was also a course that was like full of local, it was like open to the locals as well. So everyone in my class just so happened to be, it was a different demographic than what I expected. And I was also in my freshman year of college, so I couldn't stay up that late. I would just like fall asleep because I played World of Warcraft too much. Yeah, so like I ended up dropping out of computer science and studying economics. So I love economics. I think I'll eventually go back for a PhD one day. But yeah, I ended up studying economics, which is the allocation of scarce resources, which kind of applies here because you only have so much time and so many resources to actually build things. And what you'll learn, like something that I love about technology is just the fact that it really is a science experiment every single day. Like you're like, oh, maybe if we have a ceremony every 2 weeks where like we have a retrospective where people can share their feelings, maybe people will be more effective, right? Maybe they'll work better together, and then you kind of like go from there. You're iterating that way, and then you're also understanding, oh, well, maybe if we implement this automated testing tool or automated validation of the data, we'll be more efficient. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So it kind of relates back, but that's just my way of trying to justify spending X amount of dollars on my economics degree. Yeah.
Where did you study?
Virginia Commonwealth University.
You still work on your own project?
Yes. I'm actually working on an app right now. Typically, I have two things. So I always develop on mobile to try and keep my proficiency there. And I was telling Mateus that like I develop mobile apps, but they're not really mobile apps. I use Cordova as a web wrapper for JavaScript in order to make mobile apps using JavaScript. So it's not actual native development. So I'm working on an app called Mentor that helps helps with mentorships in large companies of 12,000 plus people. I think when people come out of college or just people come to a new company, like most organizations don't do a good job of matching people to mentor. You get a manager, but your manager is not your mentor. You guys will learn that very quickly because if you have the time and energy, I would say it's a really good way to gauge your comfort with different languages. That's just the way that I used to do it. And it was just very apparent, right? Because what you're doing is like when you're trying to understand how to create a function or write a function in one language as opposed to another, sometimes you're just looking at things. And Python is pretty easy. Like there are some things that are just like it's done, right? And sometimes when you get to a place where you're leveraging a different language, right, and you spend like 30 hours trying to fix a bug that in Python you never would have had to deal with, sometimes you're like, okay, all right, well, you know what, I surrender, and you might want to go that route. But some people genuinely, like I think of some of the best developers, they're amazing developers on both sides. But I do know some people who are just hardcore rudimentary, right? They want to know what builds the language that they're using, right? Like they want to know the most core language so that they can build anything, or even create their own language in the future, right? So it all depends on like what makes you feel more comfortable and where you want to dedicate your time. For my buddy that just came out of college and was studying Python, for him he was like, well, I would like to go back and learn C# and things like that. And he does know some C#, but like he was like, Python is just like really easy for me to ramp up on, and I can get a job really quickly because I know I can learn this in like half the time that it would take me to learn other languages. But it all depends on like what you're comfortable with, what your trajectory is, and like where you want to go. Awesome.
Yeah, I guess like since you have a side up, so is the red part different from your team people? Is that like more of like a concept stage?
It depends on your team. So I know some teams where the developers are like, I don't want to talk to the business people. Don't take me to those meetings, right? My team is half and half. So some of my developers are legitimately like, we'll go to a meeting and they'll just fall asleep in it. And I'm like, okay, I won't invite you next time. I learned my lesson, different deal. But they're mostly the tech leads, because when you get to a place of proficiency where the development's the easy part, you really want to understand the problem so you can really start to tinker in your mind with like, how do we build this? Those guys come with me, and because when you're in this stage, that's the most fun part, right? When you're in the early stages and you're a developer, you're like, oh, I just read about this new language that's out there, like facial recognition, like in AWS or whatever it might be. And then you're kind of like dreaming about like, maybe this would be an opportunity for me to learn a new language, right? If we implement that, not only will I learn myself, or be able to get something out of it for myself, but then I'll also be able to help these people solve this problem in like a forward-thinking way. So sometimes I'll have my team, I will always have my tech leads or my architects with me in these conversations, but depending on the developers, they can join me in this process. So I always leave it open, but honestly, a lot of people don't like business meetings, so it's really hard to get the nuggets because the business people can talk. And you have to like be able to listen for those small nuggets of value. So yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you.